The palace was burning. Through the smoke and chaos, Ambassador Lyria Sevnath stumbled through corridors she'd walked with confidence just hours before. Her elegant diplomatic robes were torn and stained, her silver hair disheveled, her lavender skin smudged with ash. Behind her, she could hear the Ravager forces breaching the inner sanctums, their war cries echoing through marble halls built to celebrate peace, not withstand war. "Your Excellency!" Captain Vexter appeared around a corner, his ceremonial armor scorched and damaged. Behind him were the 3 remaining members of her security detail, all that survived of the 12 elite Senari warriors assigned to protect her. "The evacuation shuttles are leaving from the North Terrace. We must go now." Lyria ran, her heart's pounding in her chest. The Senari embassy on Neutral Station, Kepler had been supposed to be safe. Neutral ground where 100 species conducted diplomatic business under the protection of galactic law. But the Ravagers didn't believe in laws. They believed in conquest, and Kepler Station was now theirs. They reached the North Terrace to find chaos. Dozens of diplomats and station personnel crowded toward the handful of shuttles still docked, fighting and shoving in panic. Plasma fire streaked overhead as Ravager fighters strafed the terrace. One shuttle exploded in a ball of flame, killing everyone near it. "Move!" Captain Vexter shoved Lyria forward toward the nearest shuttle. Its engines were already powering up, the pilot desperate to launch before the Ravagers destroyed them all. Lyria pushed through the crowd, her guards clearing a path with desperate efficiency. She was 10 meters from the shuttle when the explosion hit. A Ravager missile struck the terrace support structure. The entire platform tilted violently, sending bodies sliding toward the edge and open space beyond. Lyria grabbed a railing, her fingers barely maintaining their grip. Around her, people screamed and fell. "Your Excellency!" Captain Vexter reached for her, his hand outstretched. Then another explosion rocked the terrace, and debris rained down between them. When the smoke cleared, Vexter and her remaining guards were on the shuttle side of a collapsed structural beam. Lyria was on the other side alone, with Ravager forces closing in behind her. "Go!" she screamed at them. "Get to safety, that's an order." Vexter's face twisted with anguish, but he was a soldier first. He knew a losing situation when he saw one. The shuttle was lifting off, unable to wait any longer. He made a choice every commander dreads. He saved those he could and abandoned those he couldn't. Lyria watched the shuttle rise and disappear into the station's smoke-filled sky, carrying her guards to safety and leaving her to die. She felt no anger toward them. They'd made the only logical choice. Some must survive to carry on, even if others must be sacrificed. She turned to face the approaching Ravagers and prepared for the end. That's when she saw him. Through the smoke, moving against the tide of fleeing civilians, came a single human soldier. He was tall by human standards, about 6'2", with short black hair and a face marked by recent combat. His Earth Defense Force armor was battered, one shoulder pauldron completely missing, and blood streaked his left arm. But his rifle was steady in his hands, and his dark eyes were scanning for threats with professional efficiency. "Ma'am," he said as he reached her, his voice remarkably calm given the circumstances. "Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, EDF, are you injured?" I'm fine," Lyria managed. "But the evacuation shuttles are gone, yeah, I noticed." Morrison glanced at the approaching Ravager forces, then at the collapsed beam blocking the main escape route. "How many guards did you have?" 4, they made it to the shuttles. So they left you behind. It wasn't a question, and there was no judgment in his voice, just assessment of facts. All right, guess that makes me your entire security detail now. Can you run? Yes. Then stay close to me and do exactly what I say when I say it. No hesitation, no questions. Understood? Lyria found herself nodding. There was something in his demeanor, not arrogance but absolute confidence, that made her believe he could somehow extract them from this nightmare. Morrison led her away from the main terrace, away from where the Ravagers expected fleeing prey to run. Instead, he took her deeper into the station's damaged infrastructure, through maintenance corridors and service tunnels that groaned ominously with structural damage. "Where are we going?" Lyria asked as they climbed through a collapsed ventilation shaft. "Away from the Ravagers and toward the docking bays on the station's eastern side. Less obvious, which means hopefully less occupied." Morrison paused at an intersection, listening. Distant gunfire echoed through the tunnels. "They'll expect evacuees to head for the main bays or the shuttles. We're going where desperate people don't think to look. You seem very familiar with this station's layout. I was stationed here for 6 months as part of the Joint Security Force. Spent a lot of that time studying emergency protocols and alternate routes." He helped her over a pile of debris. "Military Training 101, always have a backup plan and a backup for your backup." They moved through the bowels of Kepler Station for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. Twice they heard Ravager patrols and had to hide, once in a chemical storage closet that burned Lyria's eyes, once pressed against the ceiling in a crawlspace while enemy soldiers passed directly beneath them. Morrison moved with practiced stealth, his rifle always ready but never fired unnecessarily. He communicated with hand signals, his movements efficient and controlled. Lyria found herself studying him, this human who'd voluntarily stayed behind to help a stranger while his own people evacuated. "Why didn't you leave?" she finally whispered during a pause in their flight. "You could have made it to the evacuation zones." Morrison was quiet for a moment, his eyes still scanning their surroundings. "I saw you get cut off from your guards, saw them leave, figured someone should stay. That's not an answer. You don't even know who I am." "Don't need to. You're someone who needs help, and I'm someone who can provide it." He glanced at her, the ghost of a smile on his face. "Besides, my always said I had a bad habit of making decisions that looked stupid in the moment but somehow worked out. Figured I'd continue the tradition." They reached the eastern docking bays to find most ships already departed or destroyed. But in the corner of Bay 7, Morrison spotted a small courier vessel, a Vex-class runner built for speed rather than comfort. Its hull showed damage, but the engines appeared functional. "Can you pilot that?" Morrison asked. "Yes," Lyria said. She was a diplomat, but all Senari learned basic spacecraft operation as part of their education. "But it's locked. We'd need—" Morrison was already moving toward the ship, pulling a small device from his tactical vest. "Military override codes. They work on most civilian vessels, especially the ones registered for diplomatic use." He attached the device to the ship's access panel. "Technically illegal for me to have these, but what are they going to do? Court-martial me?" The hatch hissed open. They were halfway up the boarding ramp when the Ravager patrol found them. 6 soldiers, heavily armed, blocking the bay entrance. Their commander, a massive Ravager with scarred armor and dead eyes, raised his weapon with a predator's grin. "Human and Senari, he growled in broken standard galactic. Good prizes. Surrender now, die quick. Resist, die slow. Morrison's response was to shove Lyria up the ramp. Get to the cockpit, start the pre-flight sequence. You can't fight six. G.O., Lyria ran. Behind her, she heard Morrison's rifle open fire, the sharp crack of human weapons contrasting with the heavy thrum of Ravager plasma guns. She threw herself into the pilot's seat and began the startup sequence, her hands flying over controls while her mind screamed at her to go back and help. The ship's cameras showed her the fight. Morrison had taken cover behind a cargo container, using it to create a choke point that prevented the Ravagers from flanking him. He was outnumbered 6-1, outgunned, with no backup and no hope of reinforcement. He was also winning. Morrison fought like someone who'd spent his entire life learning to defeat superior opponents. He used the environment brilliantly, ricocheting shots off metal walls, creating cover from debris, forcing the Ravagers into positions where their numerical advantage was neutralized. His movements were economical, precise, wasting no energy or ammunition. 2 Ravagers went down in the first 30 seconds. A third fell when Morrison feinted left and shot right. The remaining 3 hesitated, suddenly uncertain. They'd expected easy prey. They'd found a wolf, but even wolves can be overwhelmed. A plasma bolt caught Morrison's shoulder, spinning him around. Another grazed his leg. He was running out of cover, out of ammunition, out of luck. Lyria made a decision. She activated the ship's defensive guns, light weapons meant to deter pirates, not engage military forces, and fired at the Ravager positions. The shots were poorly aimed, barely more than suppressing fire, but they forced the enemy to take cover. It was enough. Morrison sprinted for the ramp, his wounded leg barely supporting him. Plasma fire chased him, scorching the ramp and hull. He threw himself through the hatch, and Lyria sealed it behind him. Fly, Morrison gasped, collapsing against the bulkhead. Get us out before their fighters spot us. Lyria's hands were already moving. The courier ship lifted off, engines screaming as she pushed them past recommended limits. More Ravagers poured into the bay, firing uselessly at a ship already accelerating through the station's damaged outer shell. Warning alarms shrieked as Lyria navigated through debris fields and collapsing structure. A fighter appeared on their tail, but the little courier ship was built for speed. She outran it, dancing through obstacles that would have crashed a larger vessel, and finally broke into open space. Only when they were clear, when Kepler Station was a shrinking point of light behind them, did Lyria leave the cockpit to check on Morrison. She found him in the cargo bay, attempting to treat his own wounds with a basic first aid kit. His armor was in pieces around him, revealing the extent of his injuries. The shoulder wound was deep, the leg wound bleeding freely, and he had at least 3 other injuries he seemed to consider too minor to address. Let me help, Lyria said, kneeling beside him. I have medical training. It's fine, I can, Morrison started, then winced as his shoulder refused to cooperate. Okay, yeah, maybe I could use some help. As Lyria cleaned and sealed his wounds using the ship's superior medical supplies, she studied the human who'd become her unlikely savior. Up close, she could see he was younger than his competence suggested, probably early 30s by human years. His face was lined with exhaustion, his hands scarred from previous battles, his eyes carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much violence. You never told me your rank and full name, she said as she worked. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, Earth Defense Force, 2nd Reconnaissance Division. I'm Ambassador Lyria Sevnath, Diplomatic Corps of the Senari Collective. She met his eyes. You saved my life, Sergeant Morrison. My guards left me behind, but you, a complete stranger, stayed to help. Why? Morrison was quiet while she finished bandaging his shoulder. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. 3 years ago, I was part of a peacekeeping mission on Proxima VII. Things went bad. Local warlords decided to massacre a refugee camp. My unit tried to stop it, but we were outnumbered. I called for backup, and you know what happened? Lyria shook her head. Nothing. Command decided the situation was too dangerous, the risk too high, ordered us to evacuate. My co followed orders, pulled our people out, and left those refugees to die. Morrison's jaw tightened. I couldn't do it. Refused the order, stayed behind with 2 other soldiers who felt the same. We held that camp for 6 hours until reinforcements finally arrived, saved 400 people. They must have honored you for that. Morrison laughed bitterly. They court-martialed me for insubordination. The only reason I'm still in uniform is because the story went public and the diplomatic fallout would have been worse than letting me keep my stripes. He looked at her directly. I learned something that day, Ambassador. Orders don't make you a good soldier. Doing what's right does. And leaving someone behind when you have the ability to help, that's never right. Lyria felt something shift in her chest. Your superiors punished you for being honorable. They punished me for disobeying orders. There's a difference, at least in their eyes. Morrison tried to stand, grimaced, and accepted Lyria's help. But I'd make the same choice again, every time. Some things are more important than following rules. They reached the ship's small living quarters, and Lyria helped Morrison onto a bunk. He was fading fast, exhaustion and blood loss finally catching up with him. Where are we heading? He asked, his voice growing distant. Senari Space, it's the closest safe harbor. Lyria adjusted his position, making him more comfortable. When we arrive, I'll make sure you receive proper medical care and whatever assistance you need to contact your superiors. They're gonna be pissed I stayed behind. Then they're fools. Lyria surprised herself with the vehemence in her voice. You showed more courage and honor in those hours than my entire guard detail showed in years of service. You're proof that humanity, for all its youth in galactic affairs, understands something many older species have forgotten. What's that? Morrison asked, already half asleep. That true strength isn't measured by weapons or numbers or who gives orders. It's measured by who you choose to be when everyone else has given up. She pulled a blanket over him. You chose to be someone's shield when no one else would. That's the kind of person the galaxy needs. Morrison was asleep before she finished speaking, his breathing evening out. Lyria returned to the cockpit and set their course for Senari Space, her mind racing with everything that had happened. In the hours that followed, as they traveled through hyperspace toward safety, Lyria filed reports and sent messages. She detailed everything, how her guards had abandoned her, how a single human soldier had stayed behind, how Morrison had fought against impossible odds and extracted them both from certain death. The response from Senari Command was swift and unequivocal. Captain Vexter and the guards who'd fled would face disciplinary hearings for abandoning their charge. Morrison would receive the Star of Valor, the Senari Collective's highest honor for non-citizens, for exceptional courage in defense of a Senari dignitary. But Lyria knew awards and ceremonies weren't what mattered. What mattered was the lesson she'd learned on the burning ruins of Kepler Station. That sometimes the people you should trust aren't the ones assigned to protect you or the ones who follow orders without question. Sometimes the people worth trusting are the ones who stay when everyone else runs. The ones who see someone in need and help without calculating the cost. The ones who believe that doing what's right is more important than doing what's ordered. Jake Morrison had been that person for her. A human soldier who became her shield when all her designated guards became ghosts. And in doing so, he'd proven something Lyria would spend the rest of her career advocating for. That humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their growing military might. It was their stubborn, reckless, beautiful refusal to abandon people who needed help, even when abandonment was the logical choice. Especially when abandonment was the logical choice. When Morrison finally woke 12 hours later, Lyria was waiting with food and medical reassessment. He ate quietly, still processing everything that had happened. "So," he said eventually, "what happens now?" "Now we reach Senari space, where you'll be honored as a hero and given every assistance in returning to Earth," Lyria replied. "And I write a report that will hopefully change how my people think about humans. One soldier's not representative of an entire species. Perhaps not, but you're representative of something important, what humanity could be at its best." Lyria smiled. "Besides, something tells me you're not as unique as you think. Any species that produces soldiers willing to be court-martialed for doing the right thing is a species worth knowing better." Morrison smiled back, tired but genuine. "For what it's worth, any species that produces diplomats who can fly like you can and keep their head under pressure is worth knowing better too." They reached Senari space 2 days later. True to her word, Lyria ensured Morrison received every honor, every recognition, every resource he needed. But more than that, she ensured his story was told, not just on Senari worlds, but throughout the galactic diplomatic community. The story of the human soldier who stayed when all the guards ran, who became a shield for someone he didn't know from a species he barely understood because it was the right thing to do. And in telling that story, Lyria helped change the galaxy's perception of humanity, from young upstarts to be dismissed, to potential allies whose values aligned with the best of what civilization could offer. All because one soldier chose to stay behind. All because doing what's right mattered more than following orders. All because sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who simply refuse to leave someone to face the darkness alone.